Nice. Some of you know that I'm a member of Kentuckians for the Commonwealth. My view of government is it's the collective will of the people to make lives better for themselves. And there's an organization, KFTC, that helps people find their voice in the political process and express their will to their political leaders. And I've had the pleasure of working with our speaker today as he convenes the Economic Justice Committee of KFTC, a statewide group. And he hosts many evening calls with the members. He's in Frankfurt a good bit. I think today he's working a 7-day week because he was in Frankfurt yesterday to wrap up the session, I suspect, on some issues. So, Tyler, we're very pleased to have you come today. I know it's been a busy week for you, and we look forward to hearing what's going on in Frankfurt and beyond. So, Tyler,
Thank you. I almost got passed up there. So, hello.
Hi. Hello.
My name is Tyler Offerman. Okay. You sure I can yell pretty loud?
you can take it off.
No. All right. Well, I appreciate it. No worries. My Dorset tones are sometimes hard to pick up on, so I understand. But yeah, so my name's Tyler Offerman. I work with Kentuckians for the Commonwealth. I have a title which is not super relevant to all the work that I really do, but it's very relevant to the conversation we're going to have today. So I guess officially I'm considered the tax justice organizer. Calm down. Yeah, so as was mentioned, Kentuckians for the Commonwealth. We are a 36-year-old social justice-based organization. We believe in grassroots community organizing. We think our strength comes from when we collectively pool our power together to make collective change that benefits all of our communities. Here is our mission statement. Some of y'all may have seen this before. And since we are in church, I think a reading seems appropriate. So who would like to go through and help me read KFTC's mission statement? Just go one at a time. Yes. Go for it.
So we are working for a day when Kentuckians and all people enjoy a better quality of life. When the lives of people and communities matter before profits.
When our communities have good jobs that support our families without doing damage to the water, air, and land.
When companies and the wealthy pay their share of taxes and can't buy elections. When all people have health care, shelter, food, education, and other basic needs.
When children are listened to and valued.
When discrimination is wiped out of our laws, habits, and hearts.
And when the voices of ordinary people are heard and respected in our democracy.
Great. Thanks for that. So as you can see, KFTC, we have an obvious emphasis. Justice, community power, making sure that we all have what we need and that we can live with dignity and health in our communities. But there's a couple things going on there, right? A couple issues that we work on. So as was mentioned earlier, Kentuckians for the Commonwealth, we started late 80s, I suppose, is when officially, 1981. But our origin story is one that actually we started with a different name. So we're now Kentuckians for the Commonwealth, but we used to be the Kentucky Fair Tax Coalition. If any of y'all came here thinking you were going to get tricks or insights on filing your taxes by Tuesday, I'm sorry to disappoint you. We won't, yeah, sorry. We can talk on the side about some maybe good deductions you can look into, but the kind of taxes that we're going to be talking about today is the structure, the system. Some might even say the sort of moral process of collecting and distributing money. So, as John mentioned, government has a purpose. right? I think there are a lot of different ways that government is meant to serve the community, but at the top of the list is to serve the community. So, there's a lot of jobs that we elect folks into positions to serve, but a predominant one is to collect money and then invest that money into the communities to meet the needs of those communities. So in the late 70s, this thing called strip mining started to really take off in eastern Kentucky and across Appalachia. A bunch of reasons for this, but one of which was just technology. They could now build these enormous machines where they could do what's called mountaintop removal coal mining, where you essentially blow off the top of a mountain to get the coal seams underneath them. With that exploding, there is a lot of leftover, what they call it, excess, and that is the mountain itself, what's left that's not coal. And most of that was just pushed into streams or onto communities that lived in and around those mountains. Now, as was mentioned earlier by the gentleman who spoke about the broad form deed, before 1989, 88 or 89, I can't remember the exact date when we actually won that fight, but before then, if your great-great-great uncle had sold, 2% of his property rights to a company out of New York that wanted to get to the minerals in, say, 1860, those people would start coming around about 100 years later and say, we own a part of your mineral rights. You have no ability to stop us, and we're going to have bulldozers here tomorrow to start removing it. So, and they used to be able to do that as long as they owned just 1% of the property rights. So, pretty terrible stuff. On top of that, what you saw is that there were communities, obviously, the origin story for KFTC starts in eastern Kentucky, but this is probably a narrative that many of y'all can relate to, is that people in the community realized through trying to stop this coal mining effort that there was a lot of taxes that these corporations weren't paying. So in particular, and I'm not going to get too deep into the story, but in the end of the 70s, there was a lot of flooding that happened. It was a really bad year. A lot of folks lost their lives. A lot of communities were destroyed. And a small but probably substantial portion of that was the fact that because of strip mining, the mountains could no longer receive and stop water like they traditionally did. So if, any of y'all ever think about, seeing a parking lot where a field used to be, the water runs off the parking lot where it used to sit in the field. So mountaintop removal coal mining really exacerbated flooding, and folks tried to get emergency response vehicles into those communities. I think Floyd County was hit particularly bad that year. So in trying to get these emergency vehicles into the community, they needed a place to put them, right? They needed land to set up the trailers and the food banks. And they realized that there wasn't really any good flat land that was available to them to bring these emergency vehicles into because the coal companies owned it all. And the coal companies basically said, yeah, that's a bummer for the community, but we're not going to let you put those trailers on our land. So through that process, trying to figure out, well, where can we even put these trailers, it led to sort of a research mission where folks came to realize that the vast majority of the land in these counties in eastern Kentucky had been bought up by these corporations. And because they were the largest landowners in the county, a lot of the revenue that should be raised from property taxes, they realized just wasn't being paid. So it's sort of a series of events, but it led to the formation of the Kentucky Fair Tax Coalition because folks said that they were fed up that their communities couldn't afford schools, roads, bridges. Some of these communities didn't even have adequate running water, no sidewalks. All of the things that we entrust our government with our tax dollars to invest back into our community. So I'd say one of the core attributes that KFTC has often brought to this fight is fieriness. So, we got pissed and we fought back. The ways in which we did that are long and complicated and we're not going to get into them. But in '89, after many years of campaigning, we got a constitutional amendment to outlaw the broad form deed. Also, throughout that decade, we worked to shame and force local property tax evaluators to actually get these corporations to pay their fair share of taxes. And I wish I could say that we won that fight and that it was behind us. But unfortunately, we are still fighting. So I did want to briefly just go over the top few things that KFTC works on besides taxes, and then we'll get into the good stuff. But the KFTC we're a multi-issue organization. So we work on issues of environmental justice, like strip mining, like water pollution, like air pollution. We work on issues of new energy and just transition, so trying to get more renewable energy into Kentucky, trying to make sure that economies that have been devastated, whether by the coal industry or other extractive industries, we work with those communities to provide new alternatives. We all need a paycheck, and if that paycheck's not coming from somewhere, then we need to help folks find out how that's going to be coming and make sure that it's grounded in preserving community instead of destroying it. Then we work a lot on voting rights and democracy. So getting folks involved with the election, making sure you register to vote, making sure you understand your rights, helping people overcome the apathy of the electoral process, and then also working to restore the rights to formerly convicted felons. We think that once you've served your time, you deserve to participate in community like everyone else. And then lastly, economic justice. So issues of housing, pay, minimum wage, wage discrimination, income inequality. Why are women pay less than men when they arguably are smarter? Just saying. And then within that, taxes. So just wanted to, so how many folks of all those issues, raise your hand if any of them you find interesting or you're personally passionate about. Who would say that taxes are the top of the list? All right, so we got a couple. Maybe we'll wonk out later. But yeah, so this isn't issue Olympics. It's not like one's more important than the other. But one thing that I think is often overlooked in the conversation about taxes is that tax dollars and/or the tax system impacts every single one of those issues. We're here today in a house of worship. Many religious organizations are exempted from many taxes because it's been identified within our community that there is a values-based judgment that we're making that churches and religious organizations should be exempted from certain taxation. There are other things that, obviously are taxed or are taxed at different levels. So the big takeaway for me there is that budgets and taxes are moral issues. We are making decisions based on values about what our community needs and who should be paying and how much they should be paying for those services and those programs. So this is where we're going to get into the good stuff. And we got some graphs because it's just hard to talk about numbers without a visual cue, but I'm going to try to not get too deep into these. Are we going to do questions afterwards? Okay, cool. So if it's super pressing and it has to do with the slide that's up, ask the question. Otherwise, we'll wait to the end. So what we've got here is Kentucky's budget. So as y'all can see, this is just a pie graph. It makes up the where we spend money in the state. This is not a final list. There's this has to do with our general fund. So this is the main pool of money that we have in Kentucky. This is where most of our taxes that are collected in the state go into. There is federal funds that we get. There are tobacco settlement funds that we get. There's taxes raised from gasoline taxes that go towards the road fund. That exists, and those things are real, and we're not going to talk about them because we're going to keep it simple. But this is the main pool of money that we invest in programs, resources, infrastructure, and the like here in the state. So as you can see, education makes up the vast majority. So we're 55% between primary and post-secondary education. Medicaid comes in second. Criminal justice is third. Human services, that's most of the staff that work for the state that aren't covered in the other areas. And then other is filled with a whole laundry list of other services that don't fit into those categories. So has anyone ever heard the statement, a budget is a moral document? Is that something that you've heard? Yeah. One thing that I think is equally important, but not as emphasized, is that a tax code is also a moral document. You don't get a budget in a public agency without taxes or fees being collected to make that budget. So how our money is spent is a moral issue that's based on values, and how that money is collected is also a moral issue based on values. So as you can see, income taxes and sales taxes make up 75% of the amount of money that we collect into the state. So we're talking any changes to those two things are going to dramatically impact how much money we're bringing in. Everything else makes up the remaining 25%. Property taxes, corporate income, LLET stands for limited liability entity tax. And that just is your small businesses. So I have pointed out before, and I will continue to point out, that corporate and small businesses pay 7%, whereas individuals pay about 75%. Some might call that an imbalance. And it can be argued that some corporations and small businesses pay within the income and sales taxes. But on the whole, Kentucky relies on individuals, not so much businesses or corporations, to fund the vast majority of our budget. So how does it all add up, right? Because that's it's good to know that stuff. It's important to know what our priorities are as far as budgeting. But how do you play into it? So this is who pays what. So this is all state and local taxes. So we're talking sales, income, property for, it's non-elderly. So anyone who's not retired. It's kind of hard to make out, but far left, that's anyone making under $16,000. You're paying about 9% of your income in state and local taxes. Next one, 16 to 30. Middle 20 is $30,000 to $50,000. The highest tax group in Kentucky. So that's almost 11% of your income you're paying in state and local taxes.
Can you repeat that again? What group is that?
So the middle 20, so that's $30,000 to $50,000 a year in income, paying at about 11%. And then you can see it drops. Once you get to the top 1%, that's incomes of over $330,000 with an average income of $1 million a year. They're paying about 6% of their income in state and local taxes. Yeah, so the thing that I was going to say was that ain't right. And I see. I'm glad that that's a common understanding here. But yeah, so it's interesting that those with the most to give are giving the least of all. So I'm not going to get too far into the why certain taxes impact certain people in different ways, but I will a couple highlights. So income taxes are meant to be what's called progressive, which just means they get higher the more money you have. Anyone who's ever had a conversation with someone who's really into taxes might hear the words regressive and progressive. That just means, does it go up as you get higher, or does it go down as you get higher? So our tax code is what could be called as, fairly regressive, but not totally, because there's a dip. Those folks that are living in or below the poverty level are paying slightly less. So it's bell curve, but regressive in essence. One of the big reasons for that is because this is our current income tax. So you can see that it gets up in the middle, and then it flattens and even dips a little bit when it comes to income. Now, who's ever heard someone say you should give more money to wealthy people because they are the ones that create jobs? Yes. So besides that going against every principled moral foundation that I know of, it's also patently false, and I can give you examples for how. But suffice it to say that there are those who say those that have more or who have wealth has been generated because they use all of these services, right? If you run a corporation, you're going to use the roads, you're going to use, the schools, the libraries, the broadband, all of the, the list of things that our tax dollars go into, I still say, this is a tangent, I still say, because the vast majority of medical patents, so we're talking medicines, medical breakthroughs, are paid for with tax dollars. You're usually looking at a research university is the one who comes up with those cures, those medicines. So why is it that we're not getting royalty checks? Just saying. So there's two theories of two schools. Well, there's many schools of thought, but two main. Those that have more should give more. Basically, we should be giving as a percentage of our income, not as a total amount. So the wealthy people in this state pay more if you're just looking at the dollar amount, but less when you actually take into account how much money they have. So one of the things, so this is the income tax. It's not really very progressive. This is how sales taxes impact people in the state. So if you are poor or middle class, you are going to spend more of your income on the things you need to survive, right? If you are extremely wealthy, there's only so many loaves of bread you can buy, right? So once you become very wealthy, you're going to be giving money to things like stocks, bonds, investing in non-liquid investments or whatever. But suffice it to say, you're just going to be spending less money on things that the sales tax touches. So when you add up the income and the sales and everything else, this is what you get. Now, who is paying attention to this General Assembly? A couple folks. Who is glad that it's over? I'm sorry if I'm a little rusty. I did work all week during the General Assembly, and it was rather exhausting. So, did anyone keep an eye on the tax bill that just passed? A couple folks. So, some of the choice Jim quotes from some of the legislators who were pushing it was that House Bill 366, which turned into a different bill, they pushed it through without any financial analysis, so they don't actually know what it's going to do. And in the coming days, now that it's actually law, we'll figure it out. But some of the choice quotes were, this is going to be a tax cut for everyone. This will move economy into the 21st, or Kentucky's economy into the 21st century, because we'll be moving towards a tax code that values. What was that nonsense that guy said? Values the job producers, and a whole litany of other things. So suffice it to say, they just passed a bill. It raised $200 million, and that's how they sold it. That it was good. It would help us invest in public education, and it would set our tax code up to thrive, and we would be getting buku bucks from here on out, and it's going to rain from the sky, and it's going to be beautiful. So we actually did an analysis of the bill that they did not do an analysis of. And this is what it is. So, and this will change a little bit, because for those that weren't paying attention, which I hope you weren't spending your Saturday doing what I was doing. They passed a different bill yesterday than the bill that they had just passed the day before, because they had made so many mistakes in the bill before that they had to go back and fix it. And while they were fixing it, they decided to make it worse. So these numbers are probably going to change a little bit, but they're probably not going to get better. So these are the same brackets. So pretty much everyone who's seeing their taxes increase, that's 95% of Kentuckians. So that's everyone if you make under $122,000, then you will see your taxes increase by some amount, more than likely next year. There's obviously some variability in here, right? If you've got this kind of home versus that, like there's going to be some variability certainly. But moral of the story. So the top 5% of Kentuckians are going to be seeing a tax cut, with the wealthiest, those with an average income of about $1 million, getting a $7,000 tax cut starting next year. So this is how it'll impact you individually. The cumulative impact is effectively this. So the bottom 95% of earners in the state are effectively giving the top 5% $175 million per year, and then giving the state $75 million per year. Now, there are many reasons why this is wrong. Some are moral, some are built on basic human decency, some are built on actually caring about your neighbors, you know. But it's also just bad policy. So if you follow economic policy, if you follow tax policy, you want to build your tax system based on where the growth is, like where it needs the most attention, where the most resources need to be directed. So, and it's based on the economy that exists. So before this year, the last time Kentucky had meaningfully changed its tax code was 1959. So Jim Crow was still the law of the land. I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, wasn't that Eisenhower was the president? So a long, long time ago, and all of those tax laws are built on the other laws that existed. So you can imagine the structural racism, the structural sexism, all of the problematic things that are built into our tax code. So they said that this year they were gonna change it, and it was going to be beautiful, and they were going to make it match the economy of today. So one of the things that they did, and like I said, I'm not going to get into it. KFTC's got a bunch of resources that we can give you about the exact things that they did in these bills, and we'll be doing more webinars and white papers pushed out to actually get into the nuts and bolts. But the main thing that they did was they created what's called a flat income tax. So that means that the wealthiest folks saw their income tax cut because they went to a flat 5 and our top rate had been 6. So wealthiest folks saw their income taxes cut. And if you go back here, so this is what currently is. So effectively, it's just going to go to a flat 5. Now, the top ones are 5 already because they got so many deductions that even though it was 6, it was effectively 5. We're not going to get into that. But the moral of the story is that by cutting the income tax, we lost about $500 million. So you think about all the budget cuts that we had to go through this year, cuts to higher education, cuts to mental health facilities. There's no longer any funding for public textbooks in Kentucky. The whole litany of things. Commission on Women got zeroed out. But they found a way to give the wealthiest folks in the state $500 million in a tax cut. And the reason why that's, we already talked about that's immoral. It's based on, very toxic values. Many of the readings that were pointed out or that were brought this morning made me, it's almost like you planned this, John. But it's also just bad policy because many of y'all know income inequality is a thing, right? The rich are getting richer. Everyone else seems to not be doing very well. The data supports that. So in Kentucky, since 1979 to 2013, which is the most recent numbers that we had, there's been a 60% increase in the income of the top 1% and an actual decrease in the real income growth for everyone else. So what they just did was, so this is the reality of our current economy. The rich are getting really rich, mainly through their income, and we just cut their income taxes. So effectively what they just did is they set up a situation where 2 years from now when we do the next budget, it's probably going to be worse. 2 years after that, it's probably going to be worse. Because if income keeps growing at the top and we keep reducing the amount of taxes they're paying, obviously those two systems are moving in opposite directions. So this is just a wonky way to say that. So sales taxes are, the effectiveness of sales taxes is decreasing because most working people don't have enough money to go out and buy a bunch of stuff. And then income, a bunch of rich people are getting richer. So the income tax would be the more effective policy tool to use. So, even if you're just talking policy, you're not talking moral, which you can't really do both, but some people want to try and get into that fight. It would just be better policy, and, it happens to be the thing that makes you a decent human being. Because on the policy front, the fact that we have, continued to give rich folks more money, continue to create tax breaks for the wealthy, this is our general fund. So remember the pie graph that I showed you earlier where higher education, post-secondary. So this is the amount of money we're bringing into that fund. There's a bunch of other reasons why this is happening. We exempt a bunch of services. So, like every horse sold in Keeneland is untaxed, and a bunch of other problematic things. We have we really needed tax reform this year, and what they did was not what we needed. So, and the results of this can be seen, right? I'm sure many of y'all have seen services or programs that you know or love, seen their budgets cut. And there are many. But for instance, since 2008, per pupil seek funding has been cut. A bunch of Republicans were patting themselves on the back about increasing seek funding to the highest level ever. But when you adjust for inflation, they've cut it by 18%. Same thing with higher education. We're looking at a 35% cut in higher education since 2008. And here's just a couple other. So they found the money to give $500 million away to the wealthiest folks in the state, but they could not find money for any of these things. On top of that, state employees have actually seen their, and once you get into inflation, you get into a sort of weird space, but a dollar from the 70s is not worth the same as a dollar today, based on principle. So a dollar from 2008 is worth less than a dollar today. And since state employees have not seen a meaningful raise in that time, what you've seen is they've seen their wages increase by 4 to 8%, but the value of their income decrease by almost 20. So state employees have effectively seen their wages decrease by about 15% in the past decade, sorry. So this brings us to what I think is a fitting cartoon, is that the wealthy are getting, obscenely more wealthy. The rest of us are just asking for the things that we need to thrive. And you see these folks just lambasting us for how dare we ask for so much. So I would be lying if I didn't say it felt like dark times. This is one of many issues that we're being confronted with currently. This is on the state level. I didn't even talk about the federal tax changes that just happened, but it's the same philosophy. It's the same thing. And it's preventing us from being able to invest in the things that we need as a community to survive, much less thrive. And I think we all deserve to thrive. So what are we going to do about it? Yeah. Yeah, eat the rich is certainly one approach. They seem like they might be a little gamey. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. Well, luckily, that's y'all. So, Kentuckians for the Commonwealth, like I said, we're a grassroots organization. We believe in community power. If there is a problem that's confronting the community is the one that's going to have the solutions to fix that problem. So, you know, KFTC, we're the kind of organization, there is a thing that's known as parachute organizers. Some of y'all may have seen this, especially when it comes to elections. You know, 4 months before an election, all of a sudden a whole bunch of people just swoop into the community and say, I've got a plan to help you. We do not like those kind of people, generally, and that's not the kind of organizing that we do. Because organizing requires trust. Trust is built through relationship. You need to work with a community, develop relationships. Because, like, folks in the community know what you need. Like, the community knows what it needs. Often, though, as we just went through, the community lacks the resources or the technical understanding of an extraordinarily complex and intentionally complex issue. You think taxes were accidentally complex? No, I mean, this is the money. You know, this is where the money goes. They wouldn't want those in positions of power. They don't want pesky community members knowing how the tax system works and then telling them how to do it. God forbid. So KFTC, you know, we've been organizing around this issue for a long time since we started. We're going to continue to organize around it. There's a lot of work that needs to be done just to make sure people understand what it was that they just passed, because they don't know. Like, literally, they don't know. Most of them did not read the bill, which is sad, you know. And normally, I might say that just from sort of a curmudgeon-y, pessimistic place, but they literally didn't read the bill this time. So we're all on this ride together. So with that being said, you know, KFTC, we're doing a lot of work around these issues. There's an election coming up this year. We've acknowledged that the only way to change this is we just got to vote them out. When it comes down to it, fundamentally, our political leadership has failed us. There have been few moments in this country where there's as many people paying attention to the electoral and political process. I talk about taxes and I try and make it interesting, but there were so many people at the Capitol over the past week who were zoned in to tax policy, which is not normal. It should be normal, but it hasn't been. So a lot of momentum, a lot of organizing that needs to be done. Briefly just go through a couple. So KFTC, we're working with Reverend Barber. Some of you may know. He runs an organization, Repairers of the Breach. He also has rekindled Martin Luther King Jr.'s Poor People's Campaign. So we've been working with him. We will continue to work with him through this year to facilitate a national call for moral revival. What that's going to look like is probably a lot of folks demanding action, demanding better policies, and doing it in a way that is aligned with the organizing model of the civil rights movement through the 60s and 70s. That is, try to ask nicely. When that doesn't work, try to go through the political and policy channels. When that doesn't work, shut it down. So civil disobedience, nonviolent direct action are going to be at the center of the Poor People's Campaign. We look forward to working with them on these issues. And a short quote from Reverend Barber. Caesar may be dead, but the spirit of Caesar is still alive. Because oppression still lives, and hate still lives, and racism still lives, and meanness still lives, and injustice still lives. You can see it when politicians commit the sin of taking health care from the sick so that they can give tax cuts to the greedy, knowing that thousands will die unnecessarily. So this is an important message, one that we plan on carrying forth. And then, just briefly, we are a member-supported organization, democratically supported. The work that we do, me being here, is all paid for, mostly paid for by member contributions. So if you're not a member yet, please do sign up. We do accept $0 membership fees. We don't want money to be a barrier to participation, but obviously, if you do have some money to give to support the cause and the work, we do appreciate it. As I mentioned earlier, elections are going to be a powerful tool here. Madison County has a democracy team that will be doing work around the elections, supporting good candidates, making sure y'all know who's on the ballot, how to vote, need a ride, we got you, all the things that go into that. But there's a lot of work that needs to be done, a lot of phone calls, doors that need to be knocked on. So if you are interested in these issues, there's a place for you in the Madison County chapter. Mr. Michael Harrington knows a thing or two about that. And then, yeah, a lot of the democracy team work is going to be built on a foundation of building power, right? So that's both getting the financial resources we need to be able to knock on those doors and call those people and print out all those flyers, but also the people power that is required to elect good people into office. Hopefully people that have economic justice built into the core of their platform. So that was most of what I got. I had some readings that we don't have time for, but if you are interested, there's a wonderful author named Walter Wink. He taught at the School of Theology in New York, a wonderful book that he has called Jesus and Nonviolence, A Third Way. Speaking of Reverend Barber, it goes through some of the teachings of Christ, retranslates them because he points out that King James was a terrible man. And translated the Bible in such a way to make Christianity seem passive and docile and not one that might want to violently overthrow a tyrannical monarch. Great book, some good reading in it. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions or yes.
I think, and you mentioned, sorry, that it is election time, folks, and that for us to get out there and start talking to our friends, if we haven't already, but I'm sure we probably have, knowing the UU group, about who they should vote for and listening very carefully when the forums come up, looking at the ads, which are always skewed just ever so slightly on both sides, we have to say, and really getting the people out who have done such damage to our, it's too bad the governor isn't up for, well, what are you going to say?
Yeah.
Exactly, but thank you, absolutely marvelous.
I'd love to hear your take.
One more time, Jack.
I'd love to hear your take on why so many of us vote against our own economic interests.
I'd say it goes back to the point, at least for me, of inaccessibility. So if you were to vote based on the information that you got over the last couple days about the decisions that these legislators made in Frankfurt, do you feel like you've got all the information you need to understand what they did?
Before your call.
Yeah, but after even. Yeah, but yeah.
No.
Yeah. So, I mean, especially when it comes to taxes, it's extraordinarily inaccessible. It's very confusing. It's one thing to say vote in your best interests, but if there has not been the work done to ensure you can actually even understand the issue and how it impacts you, because these legislators are out here saying that this was a tax cut for everyone, that we're going to be a model for the nation, and it's just not true. So I would say two things. One is, we got to make sure that people have access to the information that they need, but also acknowledging that we have more in common than we do apart. There is likely good and decent values that are at the center of the decisions that most people make. And if we can build understanding with each other about what those values are and find common ground based on those commonalities, I think we could probably be voting in each other's interests a lot better.
Do you have any understanding, are there other states in the nation that are as deplorable as Kentucky?
When it comes to taxes?
When it comes to income inequality, taking health care away from poor people, blowing tops off of mountains. I mean, it seems like Kentucky is particularly nasty.
Maybe, but I don't think that's conclusive. I will say this, when it comes to taxes is not an issue that traditionally motivates progressive people. It's just not an issue that a lot of folks that really care about LGBTQ rights, ending racial discrimination, it's not something that gets people pumped up. So I would say most states have bad tax codes as a result. I don't know of a single state in the nation, if we go, this might be a lot, sorry. Cool. There's not a state in the nation that I know of that has their tax code that is progressive. We're not Minnesota, not California, not even Vermont. Some of them have it's flatter. Some are, a lot better than in Kentucky, and this needs to be updated because the law that we just passed is going to make this a lot worse. But it's an issue that more people just need to engage in, and there's a lot of states that can set a better model for us, that have done things that have softened the blow, and they actually have money to invest in schools and the like. So, but I think Kentucky traditionally has had a political process that's kept people out. So I think because we have not been at the table when laws were crafted and solutions were thought of, they're mostly bad.
So it is a little difficult to follow everything that's going on, but if I understand correctly, the governor vetoed the budget bill, and then the legislature overrode the veto.
Yeah, so this graph is based on the tax bill that was attached to the budget that the governor vetoed and then they overturned. What they then did the next day, which was yesterday, is passed a new tax law, House Bill 487, I believe, which basically took this and added more to it. So the governor now could, if he wanted to, veto this newer version of this tax bill, but because they already voted to overturn the veto on this one, it is law. So if the new one passes, it will become law, but if not, then this one will stay as the law of the land.
Could you briefly say why the governor's vetoed it?
I wish I could understand why that man does many of the things that he does. I think my understanding is that the moral of it is that it didn't go far enough. He wanted more cuts to the income tax and more increases to the sales tax. The word on the streets is that he wanted the sales tax to actually be increased, and for prescription medicine and food to start getting a sales tax. So that seems to be his long term. I mean, a couple months ago he said that he wants to reduce our income tax to zero, which would effectively mean that I think we'd need a 16% sales tax, and then this graph would just wrench in the opposite direction. So that's where he wants to go. Our job is to prevent him from doing that and kick anyone that votes for those policies out of office.
I just want to thank you so much for bringing this to us. It certainly is focused very much on our principle about the democratic process, wanting to improve that at every level of our lives. It just shows that we need to have more democratic processes going on everywhere. Like, I used to belong to a union, and I don't think in a state government in Oregon, and they don't even have a state union in Kentucky. It's like people just don't think about needing to do the democratic process in every part of their lives, as opposed to, we'll just elect somebody and that'll fix it. It's like, it doesn't work that way.
You got it. Voting's the first step, and it's not the only one. And the legislature has done a really good job of busting unions in this state. There used to be great unions, but now it's on to organizations like KFTC and into communities like ours to fill that void and push that work forward.
So you kind of one more question. You kind of answered the question, I guess. So I have relatives that live in Oregon and relatives that live in Washington, and I think it's Oregon has no sales tax and Washington has no income tax. And so you just said something about if we had no income tax, that would really upend it in a bad way. I don't know. Looking at those two states, is there anything we can take from them in terms of?
Yeah. So Washington's interesting. They passed a law that basically, I'd have to go back and look at it, but I think they need a constitutional amendment to put their income tax back. Washington has a very regressive tax system. It's really bad on poor and working class people, which is interesting that it's such a progressive state, but it's only recently become politically a progressive state, so there's still a lot of bad policies that they need to figure out. Oregon has, gone in the opposite direction, which is eliminating the sales tax and trying to shift more of that tax collection into income and capital gains and the like. So yeah, I mean, I think, we can look to other states for ideas, but when it comes down to it, Kentucky is Kentucky. There's no other state that has an economy or a community or a culture like ours, and we need to make sure that while we can learn lessons from other states, it's going to require us as a community to figure out what our system looks like, because only that will be just and built on what our needs actually are.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our benediction is hymn